All right, hello everybody. I've got something for you today about studying Japanese, which I don't know. It's a fun topic. I like to get back to it every now and again, and I don't know how much more of these I have in me, but we're going to try. We're going to try. So today what I want to do is I want to caution you, or what I want to do is not caution, but like I'm going to try to encourage you um to study by translating, but I'm also going to give you a couple of caveats about some of the things that can happen if you do too much studying by translating only the most fun and exciting things that you want. And this is hard to get right, but we're going to try it. First off, if you're like me, kind of, introverted, likes reading, more interested in like learning, in like reading stuff than like going out and talking to people, it's really easy to focus your learning of Japanese or even any language by looking at like fun stuff. Just, examples like anime, manga, video games, things like that. These things are good for listening practice. And if you've got like a game where you've imported a game and there's text in it, it can be good for translation practice. It can be good for kanji practice. And this is really good for you, right? This is a fun and engaging way to learn a bit faster and learn a bit more and encourage yourself to learn. Because the thing about studying a language by yourself is that there's always something better to do than to do that. And so if you can make it part of your daily like fun time, like I enjoy doing this, then you'll be more likely to actually keep up with it. And keeping up with language study is always important, otherwise you forget things, especially in a language with a massive set of characters like Japanese has. And of course, it helps to keep your ears working and like listening to the sounds of Japanese speech working while you relax, right? These are all good things for your studies. However, I need to say that you should beware a little bit, not a huge deal, but you should beware a little bit of using things that are like fantasy or science fiction for vocabulary in particular, because what can happen is that you end up with a bunch of vocabulary that doesn't help you at all in your daily life, doesn't help you translate anything other than the particular work that that you're doing right now, and isn't really applicable to stuff outside. Just to give you an example, I always think of this as a funny example. Like, if I spend all my time translating, fantasy manga, maybe I'll know what the how you would say, the Order of Magic Castle Knights, which would be Mahojo Kishidan, by the way. But I wouldn't know how to say like, yes, I'd like katsudon, right? There's all kinds of things like that where you can spend a lot of time doing really obscure vocabulary, and it can be very unhelpful. The other thing that you're going to learn wrong from most anime, manga, video games is the politeness levels in Japanese, which are actually pretty important. I mean, if you're a foreigner, you'll kind of be forgiven for being a little bit impolite or, getting the politeness rules wrong a little bit. But in general, this is not the kind of thing that you want to make, that you want to give yourself a pass on, because people will give you a pass on it as long as you're not too obnoxious about it. But like, don't be that guy, right? This is even a problem in like in relatively grounded fiction. Sometimes you'll find, a lot of anime, manga, video games where characters refer to themselves as ore a lot, which is, not a really common thing in like actual speech. So if you go into Japan and you actually do that, you'll kind of, they'll probably be like, oh, he learned Japanese from anime, right? I mean, and just to give you an example, one of the things that I spent a little time playing around with is the Toho official comic, the Ibara Kasen. This is, it's a fun, funny, Toho manga, but like just to give you an example of some of the weird words that are in it, because of the subject matter is so bizarre, right? Like that's kind of what this is about. Like it's about weird stuff happening in Gensokyo, but like just looking at like chapter 3, we have words like gold ore and gold deposit. We have a saint, a sage, a holy man. We have meditation. We have gold nuggets. We have a specific word for an extremely rich person. We have a word for something to be worm-eaten or to be affected adversely. We have words for mercury, arsenic, and lead. We have a word for mind and soul. A lot of these words are not words that you're going to use in like day-to-day conversational Japanese, and often they're words that only appear in like this one chapter of this comic. There's one of the chapters of this comic, they have a whole discussion about like nuclear fission reactors, and it's completely irrelevant to like the rest of learning Japanese. And so what I want to say is that what you should try to do a little bit, and obviously I've spent some time poking at this comic and translating it, but like. And so I'm not going to say don't do it at all. Obviously, this is the fun stuff, right? You should have fun while studying if you can. It encourages you to study more. But if you can find like modern literature, like some kind of genre that you kind of like but isn't fantasy or sci-fi, something that's grounded in like modern day existence, right? Thrillers, comedies, romance, whatever it is that you happen to be into, right? If you pick some of those that are like grounded and recent, you'll actually get a much better view of like common vocabulary and speech patterns that happen to exist in Japan like today, right? One of the things I'll recommend is actually this book called Breaking into Japanese Literature, which is pretty neat. Basically it has Japanese versions and English versions of a bunch of short pieces of Japanese literature, and it has kanji lists and stuff like that, which will help you to like get words and sounds that Japanese people actually use and that you might actually use in common conversation with people. Other things I'll recommend. One thing that I found helped me a lot is that I'm not a talker, which sounds strange to say on a YouTube video like this, but in general, I'm pretty quiet unless people like actually prod me and get me talking. And so like I would be in Japanese class and I would have no like common thing to talk with in Japanese about people when I was in college, right? And so like I always felt like the words that were in the textbooks and stuff were not really applicable to stuff that I would talk about commonly. I'm going to talk about I can't think of a great example off the top of my head, but like, I always felt like I was learning words that were not very useful to me. And so one of the things that I did that I think actually could be useful to you if you're in that same kind of situation is a journal, actually. If you take a summary of stuff that you did today and you write it down in English, and then you translate that into Japanese, right? What you'll learn from that is you'll learn words that you specifically would use in common operation, in your common life. And so, like, there might be a textbook that's all about doing laundry, and maybe you don't do laundry. Maybe you, maybe you don't talk about doing laundry, I guess. Everybody does laundry. But, like, maybe you don't have a reason to talk about doing laundry to anybody else. And so, like, you're like, well, this is not applicable to me. What do I actually do instead? Well, I have a roommate and I do the dishes and my roommate does this other thing. And so, I'll learn words about like this example seems really stupid now that I'm getting into it. But like, I like books and not video. I like video games and not books. And so I want to learn how to talk about video games. Say this was fun. Say this was engaging. Say this had good graphics. Say I liked the soundtrack. That would be a different set of words than if I wanted to talk about books. And so by a journaling method, you can come up with words that you would use in your daily life and translate those specifically, which lets you then, operate with them in Japanese or whatever language you happen to be studying, for yourself. Other things that you can do, you can go to like, there's a website. What's it called? Kinokuniya, right? They sell and they will ship you, and they even have stores in America where you can go and you can buy books in Japanese. Like I have copies of a bunch of different books that I've bought from these stores. There's also, I don't know how common this is, but back in Michigan where I grew up, there was a Japanese restaurant, and in that same shopping center, there was a whole bunch of other Japanese owned, Japanese run stores. And one of the things that they had was just kind of like a general goods store, stationery, whatever. But they had books. And so, like, a lot of the times and it wasn't like it was some kind of like big city Japantown thing. It was just like, it was up in Novi, Michigan, I think, where there was a really good Japanese restaurant. There was a store that sold like Japanese groceries. There was a snack store. There was a stationery store, like an office supply store. But the office supply store had some books too, and so you could buy books or comics or whatever in the original Japanese. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to like shill for Kinokuniya, but there are places where you can get original Japanese language books here in America, or anywhere else in the world. It might be a little harder in some places, of course, but like there are places where you can get books that are written in Japanese, and in the worst, I don't know what but like you could go to like eBay or something like that too, where they'll sell, where people will be selling original Japanese versions of different books, light novel series, manga, whatever it is that you want. But if you can find those books, you can get them. And sometimes what you can actually do is you can get Japanese translated versions of books that you already like. So an example of this would be Agatha Christie. I really like Agatha Christie books. One of her books that, of course, is really good is And Then There Were None, right? I bought a Japanese version of And Then There Were None. And so now what I can do when I'm working on it is I can look at the English version, look at the Japanese version, figure out how they're different, figure out how this particular sentence structure in English was translated into Japanese, kind of get these examples. Because what you really want are examples to kind of train your mind to think in the Japanese structured way, which is, pretty significantly different from how English sentences are typically structured, especially as things get more complex. So the last thing I want to mention is about reproducing or speaking, like saying, like vocalizing Japanese, is that listen carefully and try to reproduce what they're doing without too much effort. That is to say, Japanese is a very it's not a very hard, forceful language, and so if you what people will often do when they're parodying Japanese is they'll make it extra super forceful, and so you'll hear things like that, and the goal is to not reproduce that if you can avoid it. Listen to how normal Japanese speaking happens. Don't worry so much about how the characters sound when they're yelling or screaming or whatever, or powering up, right? But here's the thing. Japanese does have a tonal aspect to it. It's not a super heavy thing. In fact, you can kind of get away with speaking Japanese with no tonal inflections whatsoever. And that's actually how I've seen some textbooks recommend starting speakers speak. Don't try to raise and lower pitches in words. You'll find a few words where there can be confusion if you don't do that. One of them is ame versus ame, and one of them is rain, and the other one is candy. So and I forget which one is which at the time at this moment, but that's irrelevant. You can look it up. Don't worry too much about the tonal aspects when you're reproducing it. Just try to get the syllables out and try to get them out in sounding the way that Japanese say them. So, for instance, ha, hi, hu, he, ho, right? That hu is not actually a h sound. It's actually closer to an f. So it's often transliterated or romanized as an f, right? But it's not actually an F either. It's more like just blowing air with your lips pursed a little bit. So you need to listen carefully about how these things are actually pronounced, and just try to reproduce it and go slow at first, of course. But yeah, that's kind of the last thing I wanted to mention is that the other good thing that you can use, video games, anime for is for just getting an ear for how Japanese sounds when people are talking relatively normally. Of course, it depends on what you're watching. Sometimes they're going to be screaming stuff about, like, I'm imagining like someone learning all their Japanese from Yu-Gi-Oh, which is just terrifying me. But, but like, if you can find shows where people are just kind of like talking with each other, normally, you'll at least get some pronunciation out of that, even if the vocabulary isn't useful, right? Dramas are a really good example, but it's worth noting that even in dramas, I think people use play fast and loose with politeness rules, and it's one of those things where, like, in the West, in America, for instance, politeness culture is not really that important. Like, there are some aspects of it that some people really think are important, but those people are kind of outliers in a lot of ways. It's very common in the U.S. to simply call someone by their first name right after you meet them, kind of thing. In Japanese, it's not. I mean, they're definitely getting a little less strict about it, and they'll treat foreigners, as long as you're not obviously trying to be a jerk, they'll treat foreigners in a rather tolerant way for that. But at the same time, if you're trying to learn a language and if you're trying to interact with people with a different culture, I think it's generally a good idea to try to understand how politeness levels are important, and they are important in Japanese language and in culture. So it's worth paying attention to that and knowing that most media that are going to be like entertainment media are going to play fast and loose with those rules, and so you really need to find additional examples that of people who actually want to teach you that, as opposed to going in and saying ore, 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 ore all the time. Just a quick summary. Don't be afraid of translating fun stuff, but beware that you might limit your vocabulary if you translate too much fun stuff. Find stuff that's fun but also grounded in modern day reality. Politeness is important in Japan, even though we might think it's kind of silly here in the U.S. Find literature that you enjoy, that you can learn from. Find English and Japanese versions of the same books if you enjoy English books. Consider a journal to figure out what words you use in your everyday life and learn those words first. Those are my recommendations for today. I'll put a link for this book in the description, because it is actually pretty good, right? This is actually let me see here what we've got. I'm just going to look at the table of contents real quick for you guys. We've got 4 pieces from Natsume Soseki. We've got 3 pieces from Akutagawa Ryunosuke. These are both, famous Japanese authors. Yeah, they're actually arranged in levels from low difficulty to medium difficulty to high difficulty. So I found this book to be really, really fun to look through. Plus they, what does it say? 7 original illustrations or something like that. Whatever, it's all good. But yeah, enjoy comics. Watch out for pigeonholing your vocabulary, and but have fun. And make sure that what you're studying is useful to you, because otherwise you're just gonna forget about it because it's not being of any use. I think that's it. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you want to support the channel, you know what to do. And I'll see you tomorrow with, I don't know. We'll figure it out. See you then.